Welcome to The Creative Influencer, where we discuss all things creative with an emphasis on influencers. The Creative Influencer is hosted by John Pfeiffer. John is an entertainment attorney in Santa Monica, California, who represents influencers and other creatives.
This is episode 4 of the 4th season of the Creative Influencer podcast. Today we interview Niel Robertson. Niel is the co-founder of Influencer.co, which can best be described as LinkedIn for influencers and creators. Influencer.co makes it easy for influencers to monetize their posts in one central place. It also connects brands with creatives and their managers. And as an added benefit, it has a ton of helpful resources for influencer marketing. We also take a deep dive into Niel's predictions for the different social media platforms, and you will be surprised at where he thinks things are going. Stay tuned. I am joined today by Niel Robertson. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
You are the co-founder. I'm telling you things you already know, but our audience doesn't. You are the co-founder and CEO of Influence.co. You are the founder of several other companies. And let's establish right up front, you're really smart. You're a graduate of MIT.
A couple of those things are true for sure.
Certainly the MIT part is true.
Yeah, certainly the credentials. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to ask you about 3 general areas. Sure. First, your company and what it does. Secondly, influencer marketing. And then your predictions for social media platforms. And I'm going to do it in reverse order.
Okay.
So prediction time. Need your crystal ball. Let's start with Amazon. I have heard you compare Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, to a crocodile. What did you mean? Why?
The internet crocodile. I remember saying that. I remember the context. Amazon, I think, has a history of sort of like laying a little bit below the surface in areas and kind of watching very carefully, sort of like, navigating up to the shore, and then in a pretty fell swoop, taking a big bite of something and snatching it to its surprise. They've done this with so many industries, right? They did it with healthcare, they did it with grocery, they did it with, data centers, software, on and on and on. They were very early on in crowdsourcing, things like that. So I think they sort of continue to demonstrate that is their MO. I just saw an announcement today about their own logistics company. They're basically like replacing all the third-party logistics in Amazon. So I think they continue to do that. And it's interesting as they start to set their sights on influencers and creators, which, it might not be obvious why that's useful to Amazon, but Amazon has this massive affiliate program. They kind of invented the concept of online affiliate links. Influencers and creators are kind of the new wave of that, the new wave of sort of pushing traffic from audiences to shopping destinations. They've been sort of building a whole bunch of infrastructure to get influencers and creators on board their platform.
And what is your prediction with Amazon and Twitch?
It's interesting. Twitch, I think Amazon is trying very hard to push Twitch to be a more broad platform, right? So obviously it was built on top of gamers, but they're trying very hard to develop it into a very broad live viewing experience. And it's actually interesting. I was playing around with Discord this morning. If you're familiar with Discord, it's kind of a chatting channel that started in the gamer industry, where people would get on and live voice chat and text chat while they're actually playing group games. They raised a ton of money not that long ago as well, and are trying to push forward into being much broader as a sort of a Gen Z discussion group, kind of platform as well. I think that's the directory. I think that's the direction for Twitch. And I think, they have a lot of good DNA and bones and software integrations with traditional Amazon that they've been working on. There's a huge amount of interest in integrating social and commerce right now. So if you, I don't know if you noticed today, Instagram announced that they were putting both Reels and their shopping section onto the main footer of the app, which is a really
I did not see that.
yeah, it just came out like a few hours ago. It's interesting because if you look at it, the center of Instagram was always the plus, right? Adding a piece of content, and now the center of Instagram is Reels. So that's a really interesting philosophical change from the platform being one where you create content to one where you consume content. Like the center point is consumption, not creation, and then right next to it is shopping, which is kind of consistent with Facebook going into marketplace. Amazon, of course, has huge shopping integrations with Twitch already, but um, they're launching Amazon live shops. There's a whole bunch of industry activity around, live shopping experiences. I think people are kind of gearing up for finally, after 10 years of predicting we're 1 year away from it, finally gearing up for social and commerce to join in a much more native and interesting way.
Right.
I think they want to be right there in front of that.
And Amazon is certainly primed to do that.
Yeah, they are, right? On every single front. Yeah. Yeah, funny.
Okay, so shift gears a second. What is your prediction now for YouTube?
YouTube's harder one. I think YouTube is increasingly stuck in like a mid-format size. Obviously, TikTok as a short format has grown up and has just made entertainment, bite-sized entertainment super accessible. YouTube has an incredible amount of viewer hours, but it's definitely longer form content. I think it's hard to speak. Every platform, it's hard to sort of step outside of your own generation and understand how other generations use it. I use YouTube and TikTok in a different way than someone who's 13 years old or 15 years old. But I see that YouTube is becoming more and more of the mid-form content place. Their ad model makes it so hard to just snack on content in there. It's so frustrating unless you buy whatever YouTube Red or something. I think they'll go further and further into that, but that's still massive, right? There's so much that's going on with mid-form content creation, with education, classes, things like that. I suspect they'll just continue to try to carve out that niche. They did launch a product to try to compete with TikTok, their Shorts product, but they announced it maybe a month or two ago, and it's been really crickets from them about anything going on with it. So I'm surprised that they haven't put more wood behind that arrow.
Let's shift to Snapchat. What's your prediction for Snapchat?
Snapchat. I said somewhere along the line, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that Snapchat was a slow death march because they didn't have profiles. There was no way to find and follow someone that you were interested in the platform. And so it was essentially this communication application, sort of like trying to have a social media, frontage built on it. And I just really didn't think they were going to move off of that because of what, Evan Spiegel said constantly about Snapchat. But they announced about a month ago that they were launching profiles. So actually, my company has a media arm called No Filter. We actually did a piece on one of the biggest Snapchat influencers that's building a presence on Snapchat. I think they're back in the game. I think they've got incredible brand loyalty with teenagers, Gen Z. And I think if they can figure out how to add presence into the platform in a more traditional way, they'll gain some share again. That company has 9 lives. It's unbelievable.
And if they could figure out the interface, so it's easier to get around.
Well, it's so funny. It's one of those things where, there's this old theory called increasing returns philosophy, which comes from Brian Arthur and the whole theory of why Microsoft is an incredibly successful company in the 80s and 90s. And one of the things that increasing returns philosophy states is that complicated UIs actually build user lock-in. And we're all very used to Microsoft Office products because they were not easy to use. You'd learn key combinations and all sorts of menu things and where are things in ribbons. We've had really horrible UI most of our life, so I think we should remember that. And I think the younger generation has learned Snapchat UI, and it's huge lock-in when you know how to do something on Snapchat. It's a reason to keep going back there. Never underestimate the value of friction as opposed to the inhibitor of it, right?
Well, and let's shift to Instagram because there's zero friction on Instagram.
Instagram,
Unless you're trying to find reels.
well, not anymore because it's the center button, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think that I was listening to a podcast from Kara Swisher, and she was talking about when she was interviewing the Instagram team in the early days before it had been bought by Facebook. And she was saying at that point in time, Facebook was heavily integrating the business experience, business pages, shopping, commerce, all that kind of stuff. And she was saying Instagram is this light, fun entertainment thing that has no shopping in it, and Instagram is becoming the world's digital mall. And recently she was sort of talking about that point again in light of TikTok. And I think Instagram is just the 10 years later version of that, right? Instagram today, because of the announcement, is solidifying themselves as the world's digital mall. And once while shopping is fun, it means that brands are a lot more front and center in the picture. Commerce is a lot more front and center, and entertainment inevitably takes a back seat. So I think you just see this. It's almost like this Clay Christensen cycle of people start with entertainment and they get sucked into commerce. They kind of can't help get out of it. And then they go, oh, no, we can't do that anymore. And then something pops up that's purely just entertainment. And then, TikTok does their partnership with Walmart. They just announced their partnership with Shopify. I feel like I've said the word announcement about 17 times so far in this conversation. It's been an incredibly robust couple of months for massive game-changing moves in the social media landscape. If you just take a look at just the stuff that we've talked about in the last 5 minutes, but TikTok is getting sucked into commerce as well. They can't help it because I think people feel like social commerce is inevitable and maybe required to keep people's attention.
Right. And then you had mentioned Facebook, and I've heard you say before that the genius of Facebook is it doesn't change.
Yeah, it's funny. We'll talk a little bit about what influence.co does, but Facebook, there's utility in having everybody be there. And that doesn't mean it's where you want to spend most of your time, but the fact that it doesn't change that quickly, it's somewhat reliable. I think I said that about the UI, and then ironically, it actually changed the UI not too long ago.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because we think a lot about like LinkedIn, and LinkedIn has the same sort of thing, right? Like, people that are growing up, like their parents are on LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn has not changed that much, although just this week they actually changed their UI. They changed all their color palettes and everything,
Right.
trying to contemporize a bit. But the fact that it is what it was sort of perceptively 3 or 4 years ago, and it's sort of still that. These sort of pillars of stability in social networks are actually quite valuable, I think, to us as a society, right? Too much change is unsettling, and so you need some of these kind of home bases that you're familiar with.
Well, it's so funny because it's not like 2020 didn't have change.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so the last one I have on the list is Pinterest. What's your prediction?
Pinterest. Pinterest continues to be like the little engine that could, and it's not even that little of an engine. It's got a massive amount of high commercial intent traffic, and I think they are also trying to bring commerce closer to the forefront of Pinterest. They've launched shoppable pins, and they've got a bunch of activities related to people putting stories on there. I think Pinterest has struggled historically with their relationship with influencers and creators. People may not remember this, but back in the early days, a lot of people were making money off of Pinterest because they would affiliate the links that they were putting in. So if your audience isn't familiar with affiliate links, you can either put a link to a stroller, on Amazon.com that your audience buys, or you can put an affiliated link. And the affiliated link simply means if someone buys that or something else because they clicked on your link, you get paid, Amazon's about 4% of the purchase price. There was a massive amount of money that was getting paid out to affiliates. And I know this because I had a company that was one of the biggest affiliate companies in the world. And Pinterest was just a juggernaut. And then they systematically prevented it from happening on the platform. It's not really clear why they did it. I think they just kind of got spooked that they felt that it was somewhat like disingenuous to the audience, not knowing that there was money moving around. And it took them about 6 years, and they actually ended up allowing affiliate links again. But in the process, all of the creators and influencers wandered off to other platforms, and I think that was a huge miss. So they've been trying very hard to rebuild relationships with influencers and creators, build tools for them. But I would say it's not deeply embedded in their DNA in the way that it clearly is in terms of Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, etc. I think if they can get their act together there, and this applies to Snapchat too, if they can really figure out like how to authentically put creators into the core of their strategy and not have them be something on the periphery, I think we'll hear a lot more from them.
What's the next big thing? I mean, other than what we've talked about, what's lurking out there that nobody's heard of that we're in a year? It's like, where did that come from?
I'm really biased here, but I think that the next big thing is new professional networks. I think, you know, LinkedIn has sort of the scale of scale is its greatest weight, right? It's sort of becoming Facebook. It's, you know, your kind of your parents' professional network. And I think Gen Z, they work differently, they work remotely, they have passion projects and side hustles, and they collaborate online, and they're used to communicating, you know, in channels, in chat channels. They don't have a work culture because they're not going into an office. I think this leaves a huge void for, you know, one, maybe a few companies to come in and provide a new concept of a professional network. People have been talking about kind of the unbundling of LinkedIn for a long time, and it's happening in a very niche set of ways. But I think like that's an innovation that's going to kind of come out of nowhere, and then you're going to see all of a sudden every 18 to 25-year-old visiting, you know, a professional site that you've never heard of before.
So how do you keep up with the different platforms? I mean, because you're obviously very knowledgeable about each one, but how do you keep up?
So, I mean, obviously, you know, our business, Influence.co, which is essentially LinkedIn for influencers and creators, right?
We're going to spend some time on that. I'll come back. I'll come to it.
Yeah. So my business is in the world of influencers and creators. We're cross-platform, so we welcome people from anywhere you want to build an audience, whether it's a blog or a podcast or TikTok or Instagram. They're on the platform. And of course, my team is in that world as well. And a lot of it's just that the team is constantly sourcing articles and news, as well as people on our platform. We have a couple hundred thousand people on the platform. And so we just get a lot of information sourced from people that are living on social media. And I just, you know, I make it a part of my morning and my evening to scan everything. And you know, I live in LA, so I'm close to a lot of the players, and I have a lot of friends kind of that are in the orbit. So things don't go on too long until before I hear about them.
So let's shift gears a second. So the second area I wanted to talk about was influencer marketing. Yeah. How would you describe influencer marketing?
I think influencer marketing is changing a lot, right? I mean, my view is an influencer is anybody who has built an audience, usually because they're creating content specifically for that audience, and is willing to work with someone who wants to get access to that audience. And so that is a very broad definition, right? It's very audience centric. I think a classic version of influencer marketing is, I've got a product I'd like you to post on Instagram about it. But I think we're seeing a lot more interesting modern derivatives happening from, I think it was like Walmart, who took a bunch of their traditional modeling content and put their clothing on influencers and sort of sprinkled that around the site. And so there's just a lot of strong signal of people that were there. Back when people were doing pop-up events, influencer marketing was very event-centric. So I think the world is constantly trying to figure out and remix how to use a combination of audience builder and content creator in really interesting ways. But the core meaty center of it is still, I've got an audience, and you're paying me or giving me in kind to get something in front of that audience.
How has it disrupted traditional media?
Well, I mean, I'll give you an example. So one of our investors in Influence.co is Singapore Press Holdings, which is the sovereign media company in Singapore, their venture group. And if you sort of think about the path of a media organization, and it could be anybody, News Corp or SPH or whatever, 60, 80 years ago, like these are old organizations, right? Maybe 50 years, they like owned the printing press and they owned the news stores, right? And then they owned the printing press and then they distributed the newspapers. And then things went online and they had, all their different publications, whatever.com, and they still owned all the brand relationships. So they had all the classified and they were managing all the advertising. And then kind of what happened over time is that people started consuming a bunch of their news from centralized places like Twitter and YouTube, et cetera. And they started to put content directly onto those platforms. And so they have, the asset that they controlled, distribution, has been whittled away and whittled away, whittled away, whittled away. And they've become content producers where they're producing primarily on other people's platforms. That's a massive inversion. So influencers have accelerated that because influencers all live on a few core platforms. And so they've just been a gravity well of attention into these social media platforms that has dragged all these traditional news organizations that have their own, websites in there. Now, of course, there are people that can survive that. New York Times, for example, would survive that. But by and large, it's completely and utterly upended media companies. Also, the other way to look at it is like a media telecom company. The prized asset of that company was always their audience, right? So NBC had 60 million people in their audience, and they built that up over years and years, and that's what they sold advertising against. An influencer can build an audience of 60 million followers with with a couple lucky videos on TikTok in a couple of months now. That's massively disruptive. If the thing that you spent 20, 30 years building and monetizing is all of a sudden as quickly attained by a person, not a corporation, that threatens a lot of people's hegemony, and that's what's happening now.
Which is the perfect transition to your company. So when was it formed? You are the co-founder.
That's right, yeah.
When was it founded?
We started the company in 2016.
And here's the description that I found was, it is the world's largest community of influencers, creators, and industry professionals, and home to our No Filter publication and the Creatorscape. So I want to unpackage that a little bit.
Sure.
Let's start with the community. I've heard you say that you wanted to build a community. How did you go about doing that? What did you mean?
So, our goal was to build a professional community, right? So let me put that modifier on there. People that were looking at doing the work of influencers and creators in a professional way. So taking it seriously, being organized about it, et cetera. We could have done that by just creating a Facebook group and trying to invite a bunch of creators into it. And that's fine. There are some great Facebook groups that do that. But Facebook is not great at providing context about who people are. If you see two people chatting, you don't know anything about who they are, where they're from, what they focus on, how big their follower count is, what social networks they're popular on, et cetera. And when you're working in the influencer and creator world professionally, like that context is hugely valuable. So we built a lot of this function. We built all this functionality from scratch on the platform. And we now integrate content, community, and commerce together. The community is kind of the tie that binds everything. So everybody that joins our platform is a member of the platform, just like you're a member of LinkedIn. But we do a lot of things to try to get those members to interact with each other in ways that are more bi-directional than, LinkedIn tends to be quite broadcasty, right? I follow a bunch of people, I get a bunch of stuff broadcast to me. Maybe I like your comment. We're aspiring to do things that are a bit more, multi-directional.
So what is a no filter publication?
Well, No Filter is just the name of a digital publication that we produce. We saw this trend where influencers and creators were becoming cultural touchstones. So I think the pandemic was a great accelerant to this understanding. So much of the public conversation was about influencers and creators during the pandemic because they were touching everything. They were talking about getting COVID tests, and they were breaking the rules and decamping to the Hamptons and getting in trouble for it. And everybody's sitting there on their phone, and TikTok was at a rise. And so we launched our publication in March. We hired the editor of Billboard, who was the editor of Rolling Stone beforehand. So someone with really the chops and credibility. His name's Nick Catucci. And someone who understood, coming from the music world, that artists are a similar cultural touchstone, and could translate all of the learning about being in that industry for a very long time into influencers and creators. And so that's what that publication focuses on. And I'm really pleased. We've done an incredible job of building a voice in the industry. There's not a lot of people that cover influencers and creators directly. You get, a couple publications, but most of it's what we call tourism journalism. It's, Men's Health Magazine writes a profile of a fitness influencer. Nothing wrong with that, but it's kind of a side act. And we're dedicated to it. And so now people are recognizing, especially a lot of the bigger influencers and creators, that we've aggregated this audience of people that are hyper focused on the sort of the cultural storyline there. We're getting access to some really incredible people to tell their stories, in the publication. We cover everything from news to industry to gossip to long feature pages, depending on what's going on.
I apologize because I signed up last night and I haven't had a chance to play with the platform enough. How does one get to this? How does one get to read it?
The publication is totally freely available. Just go to nofilter.influence.co.
Okay.
And you can read it. You can find us on Twitter at nofilterpub, TikTok nofilter, Instagram nofilter, those handles. So yeah, that's all totally free. I mean, our platform is totally free as well. Just like LinkedIn, anybody can sign up for it. No matter where you are in your career of an influencer. From, we sort of joke about like the new equivalent of like the person who got off the bus in Hollywood and Vine and said, "Where do I go to be famous?" There's a heck of a lot of people that are asking that question in the context of being an influencer and creator, and we hope our platform is a starting point for them. But we also have influencers and creators with tens of millions of followers in the platform.
Both my sons have asked me that question. I said, "You figure it out."
Send them to influence.co. We don't do a perfect job, but we progressively get better and better and better at helping people take that journey.
So if you're an influencer and you've started to get a little traction, and they sign up to your site, what advice would you give them?
So a few things. One is usually the first point of entry for influencers and creators starting to work is having some kind of a brand collaboration. And what people don't realize is that you can create amazing branded content without having an official collaboration, right? So, whatever, I've got my iPhone. Nothing prevents me from creating amazing content about my iPhone and putting it on my Instagram and starting to build a portfolio and a showcase of what brands can expect. That way, when you build a profile on influence.co, which is like a digital media kit, you can show like, this is what I would do. And then that turns into, this is what I have done. And that turns into, this is what I got paid for. Right. And then this is like what my team collaborated on. It's a very logical progression. That's one thing. The second thing is, I would say pick something that is really, pick a lane that's really authentic to you and just stay in that lane. I think a lot of people want to be pets plus food plus travel plus whatever. They're trying to casting the net very wide, hoping that it's attractive to a broad group of people. And that's not what people tend to follow on Instagram, and other platforms. They tend to follow someone for comedy and someone for travel. We see a lot of people that want to be lifestyle influencers, and kind of that means like, everything about
everything. No, yeah.
Not really. I mean, like, it's very hard to be a lifestyle influencer. People usually morph into lifestyle influencers once they've reached a huge following, and like all parts of their life are thus interesting.
Right.
And then I would say participate, right? That our community's there. There are other places that you can go, talk to people, ask questions. We see so many people in our community asking questions that we formalized that into a product, which is like a little mini Quora that's on our platform. You can come in and say, should I wear a mask when I'm shooting content during COVID? And then influencers and brands and everybody else can come in and answer those questions. And so we're building this huge repository of questions, many of which are great for people that are just starting out. Just peruse those, see what people have to say, et cetera.
What advice would you have for a brand that's coming on?
So one of the things that's interesting about this industry is brands, generally speaking, know as little about it as many influencers, and that's okay. Um, I think brands maybe feel like they need to know what they're doing, and everybody's learning. And so what we see actually happening on our platform is that brands are participating in the conversation, saying, "Do you guys like discount codes? How do you feel about that?" Asking a lot of questions before they just sort of barrel in and sort of like fake it till they make it. Um, and the great thing about a platform like ours is you can try to work with a bunch of different types of influencers and sort of see like how your product resonates with different audiences. A lot of people tend to find really good outcomes with unexpected audiences. So, for example, we had a hair care product that Kendall Jenner was involved in on the platform, and they came in and they were looking for makeup artists and beauty influencers and things like that. And we just recommended that they kind of open the aperture, and they started getting a whole bunch of inbound from mommy bloggers because mommy bloggers are doing their kids' hair, and their kids love having Kendall Jenner products, and so it ended up being like a huge part of um, that opportunity for them to go after this very different type of influencer than they had suspected, um, kind of coming up with it on their own.
So describe a campaign. I'm coming in and I have a starter budget of $10,000, and I sell an energy drink.
Sure.
What kind? And I use that because I looked over and I have my energy drink sitting there.
Yeah.
What's how do you approach it?
Sure. Well, so I would say that probably $10,000 these days is way bigger than most people's starter budgets, right? So I'll just start with that, right? I think
Okay.
a lot of people are coming in and they're starting with in kind if their product is kind of worth something, or in kind plus a little bit of a budget. But sort of regardless of what like physical amount you have to spend, I think you want to come in and the first thing you want to do is figure out what type of influencer do I want to work with. And so a very simple way to think about that is how many followers do they have, right? Are they less than 10,000, 10 to 50, 50 to 100, et cetera? And the larger follower count you get, the more worth the influencer is going to expect. And so the reason I say start there is you need to kind of come up with a bit of a map for how much money or in kind plus money or whatever that you have to spend, and then do you want to do it in big chunks or little chunks or a couple big chunks and some small chunks. Kind of figure out what that looks like first. Then you go out and on our platform you describe who you want to work with, and you let people that are interested in your product apply to you, which is great because people are sort of self-selecting into your product and the fact that it's related to their audience, which they'll think they'll like it. Um, and you just review applications, kind of like you would for a job. And a lot of it is quite visceral. You take a look at their aesthetic, you take a look at their branded content, and if you like them, you start to talk about that exchange of value, right? Whether it's the rate you're paying or in kind. And then really a lot of the campaign is logistics. So our product is designed to help you kind of organize the logistics of working with maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 people. I think the thing that surprises brands the most is it doesn't dawn on them until they're in the middle of it that like there's a bit of a coordination exercise that goes on here. Most people are not working with DJ Khaled spending $1 million, one person. They're working with 30 people. That means you got to ship something to 30 people. You got to make sure it gets there. They all got it at the same time. They're creating content. They're posting it at the same time. It's a bit of a cat herding experience, and so I think people sort of like come in a little bit unprepared for that section of it. And there's a lot of great products, like ours now that can help kind of navigate that through. But it takes a bit more time than one would think, because when you're dealing with 30 human beings, nothing ever goes on schedule. Right. And as much as I love every one of our influencer members, many of them are also learning how to be consummate professionals as well. And so they maybe don't communicate as much as they should, or with 30 people, like a lot can go on, especially during COVID. Someone might have to run off to handle their family or do whatever. And you just kind of work through the process. the great thing about influencer marketing is you could do that whole thing I talked about with one person just to get a feel for it. You could pick one person, send them the product, see what their content creation was like, see how many likes and comments they got, or if they used affiliate code, and kind of really like test the waters to get a feel for it. And it's a great way to use our platform because you wouldn't have to pay anything to do that on our platform. You can do that whole process for free on our platform. And then when you're ready to kind of really kind of, you know, step in and to the, to the deep end, you got a whole bunch of infrastructure to do that at scale.
So what else have I not asked you about that I should have asked you about?
Oh, geez, what do I spend my time thinking about these days?
It's
I mean,
like a nice, broad, open-ended question at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think like what's really interesting to me is if you kind of pull the camera back a little bit, you can see this broader creator economy or passion economy forming. And what people might not realize is the amount of infrastructure, tools, and funding going into companies to help influencers and creators make money is accelerating at an incredible pace. There, 2 years ago, there was very limited venture capital for it. Now the venture capital is flooding in. I'm getting tons of inbound calls from VCs that are looking to put money into companies. And it means it's going to be easier and easier and easier, no matter what your passion is and how you prefer to monetize it, whether it's find brands to work with, directly ask your fans for subscriptions, do one-on-one video chats, whatever.
Right.
There's a platform and a tool for everything now. And it's never been easier to make money off of what you care about. So I think that's going to only accelerate this generational shift in terms of people kind of having a side hustle because they actually can make some money from it, and then also maybe having their day job and eventually hoping to turn their side hustle into their day job. It's fun. Like if you just watch the news every day, there's a company or two that announces its funding that is taking another piece of the landscape and just making it easy to monetize.
Yeah, it's still the Wild West. So
it is. It's a very it will be this way for the next 5 or 10 years probably 5 years until enough companies get enough scale that they'll start to consolidate. It's also unclear what parts of the landscape the big social media platforms want to participate in. So to give you an example, many people will be familiar with a company called Patreon, which helps people get subscribers for their podcast or whatever. And Facebook, YouTube, et cetera, have had very schizophrenic relationships with the fan monetization world. Not Patreon themselves, right? They've both had partnerships and not had partnerships, but like YouTube had a product where you could charge for subscriptions, then pulled it back, then made it for gamers only, then pulled it back, then said they were going to do it again. And Facebook has had groups where you could charge for the group and then didn't do it, then made it for gamers. And they really haven't figured out philosophically if this is part of their platform or if they need to, bear hug someone like Patreon, get very close to them and make sure that the community of fans is being built on the platform on Facebook, but the monetization is fine for someone like Patreon to go do. I think they don't really know the answer to that yet. And so I think that's a really interesting hand grenade that's going to get lobbed into the middle of the creator economy in the next 2 or 3 years when they just decide we're either all in one way or all in another, because they can't sit on the fence for much longer.
So my last question, where can people find you on the internet?
You can always find me on influence.co, right? influence.co/NielR1. My name is NIELR, the number 1. And that's my same handle on Twitter. And then you can always email me, niel.robertson@gmail.com. Yeah.
Thank you. This has been great. I'll come right back.
That's it for this time. If you enjoyed our podcast, please write a review on iTunes and tell your friends to subscribe. If you have any questions about influencers or suggestions for future episodes, email them to John at Pfeiffer@pfeifferlaw.com. Thank you for listening.